Thank you for joining the JAF on Tech podcast series. And this is where we talk about technology, artificial intelligence, policy, and the implications of the ever-changing world of information security. If you can leave a comment, a like, or subscribe, it would mean the world to us, especially the humans.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. And we're diving deep into third-party security today. We've got a great mix of sources lined up, from the nitty-gritty of securing different systems, Windows, Mac OS, the whole shebang, to the big picture stuff, leadership roles, risk analysis. It's fascinating stuff. And it's more relevant than ever because, let's be real, it's not just about our own cybersecurity anymore, right? It's about who we're connected to, who we are entrusting our data to.
It really is the interconnected world we live in now. And what struck me going through these sources is how they emphasize that third-party security is not just a tech issue tucked away in some IT department's basement.
Right.
It's a business imperative. It impacts every single level of an organization, from the folks in the boardroom making strategic decisions to the ones on the front lines, actually building and managing the systems.
Absolutely. And speaking of the folks at the top, one of the things that jumped out at me was the emphasis on leadership. It's easy for execs to say, oh yeah, security is a top priority, give a lip service. But these sources really dig into what it actually takes to walk the walk.
Couldn't agree more. It's not just about throwing money at the problem,
Right.
Allocating a bigger budget for security tools.
Right.
It's about fostering a culture of security where everyone from the top down understands that it's part of their job description.
And that they have a personal stake in it too. Think about all those high-profile data breaches we hear about in the news. The damage is often magnified because too many people had access to sensitive data they didn't need in the first place. So it's about leadership setting the tone. But then it's on those engineering teams to actually build those secure systems. And these sources, they get into the weeds. We're talking best practices for Windows, Mac OS, Linux, even cloud platforms.
And this is key. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. What works for a Windows environment might not cut it for a Linux server. And the cloud? Well, that's a whole other beast.
Totally. It's like, you wouldn't use a bicycle lock to secure your front door, right? You choose the right tool for the job. And these sources give us the blueprints for those tools. But even with the best tools in place, you still need people who know how to use them, right? People who can monitor for threats and respond quickly and effectively. That's where the analysts come in.
Absolutely. They're the digital detectives, constantly reviewing logs, looking for anything suspicious, investigating potential breaches.
But they have to stay ahead of the curve because, let's face it, the threat landscape is always changing.
It's a game of cat and mouse. Hackers are always looking for new ways to exploit vulnerabilities, so analysts need to be in the know, the latest threats, the newest attack vectors.
Constantly learning, constantly adapting. Okay, so we've got leadership setting the stage, engineers building those defenses, analysts monitoring for any signs of trouble. But there's another crucial piece of the puzzle. We can't forget the auditors.
The independent eyes. They're there to make sure everyone's following the rules, that the security program is actually effective.
Exactly. Think of them like the independent inspectors making sure a building is up to code. They review policies, conduct penetration testing, basically trying to hack into your systems to find weaknesses, and then they give you a report card. And let me tell you, those reports can be eye-opening. No one wants to be the team that gets called out for lack of security. So, yeah, it's a great motivator to keep everyone on their toes.
For sure. And I think what we're seeing here is that managing third-party security risk is a team effort. It really does take a village.
It does. And it all starts with that shared understanding that security isn't just some IT issue. It's everyone's responsibility. Okay, so we've laid the groundwork, who's who, and the stakes of the game. Now let's roll up our sleeves and dig into some of the practical stuff. And these sources, they don't disappoint. They dive deep into specific operating systems. And first up, Windows. It's everywhere. And securing it, well, it's kind of a big deal.
It really is. It's the most widely used operating system out there, which makes it a prime target for attackers.
Exactly. And, going through these sources, it struck me, it's not just about knowing which antivirus to install or how to configure a firewall. It's about the bigger picture, the strategic thinking behind each security measure. Like, take Active Directory, for example.
Oh, Active Directory, the heart and soul of many Windows networks.
Right. And so many organizations rely on it to manage users and computers, but these sources are very clear. It's not just about having usernames and passwords. It's about granular control, knowing who has access to what and why.
Absolutely. It's the principle of least privilege in action. You don't give the intern the keys to the CEO's office, right? Same goes for your digital assets.
Love that analogy.
Yeah.
And these sources really break it down Role-based access control, limiting admin privileges.
Yeah.
It's about making those tough decisions, not just defaulting to, well, let's just give everyone access to everything to make things easier.
Right, because convenient doesn't always equal secure. And speaking of layers of security, the sources don't skimp on endpoint protection either. It's antivirus, anti-malware, intrusion detection.
It's like having a multi-layered defense system.
Exactly. Each layer catches something different, working together to keep those bad actors at bay. And of course, let's not forget about patch management.
Ah, yes. Those update notifications, the bane of our existence. I'll admit I've been guilty of hitting remind me later a few too many times.
We've all been there. But those updates, they're not just about adding new features or making things look pretty. They often contain crucial security fixes.
So no more procrastinating on those updates. Got it.
Good. Because those patches are often released in response to newly discovered vulnerabilities, weaknesses that hackers are actively trying to exploit.
So it's like leaving your front door unlocked just because you don't feel like getting up to turn the lock.
Pretty much. And since we're on the topic of locking things down, we have to talk about encryption. It's the digital equivalent of putting your most sensitive data in a vault.
And the sources highlight two main types, BitLocker and TLS. BitLocker, as I understand it, is all about protecting data that's stored on your device, right?
Exactly. So even if your device is lost or stolen, that data is still protected.
And TLS, that's for data that's on the move.
You got it. Think of it as a secure tunnel for your data as it travels across the internet. Online banking, e-commerce, even just sending an email, TLS, make sure the information stays confidential and tamper-proof.
Okay, so we've tackled Windows, but let's not forget about those sleek Macs out there. They often get touted as being more secure out of the box, but these sources don't sugarcoat it. macOS has its own set of vulnerabilities, and you can't just assume you're invincible.
Absolutely not. It's like having a house with a good security system, you still lock your doors and windows, right? And these sources really emphasize that for organizations, mobile device management, or MDM, is key.
Right, because it allows IT to enforce those crucial security settings across all their Macs. You know, password complexity, device encryption, it's like having a central command center to manage it all.
And when it comes to encryption on macOS, File Vault is a game changer. It encrypts your entire hard drive, so even if someone gets their hands on your Mac, they can't access your data without the encryption key.
It's like having Fort Knox protecting your files. And then there are those built-in security features that sound like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, Gatekeeper and Xprotect.
Think of them as automated bouncers for your computer. Gatekeeper verifies the integrity of applications before you even download or install them, making sure they're from identified developers and haven't been tampered with.
Okay, that's reassuring. And Xprotect.
That one's constantly scanning your system for known malware, comparing files against a database of known threats, and blocking them before they can do any damage.
So it's like having a security guard who's always on the lookout for suspicious activity.
Exactly. But even with all these security features built in, the sources are very clear. You can't just rely on the defaults. Strong, unique passwords for every account, a robust firewall, and those core best practices we talked about earlier, they're still essential.
Right, because even the strongest fortress has its weaknesses if you don't keep those defenses up. Okay, we've done Windows, we've covered macOS, but now we're entering the realm of, let's be honest, the unsung hero of the operating system world, Linux.
Ah, Linux, the workhorse of the internet. It might not be as flashy as some of its counterparts, but it powers countless servers, websites, and a huge chunk of the cloud infrastructure we rely on every day.
Exactly. And these sources make it clear. When it comes to Linux, there's no room for complacency, especially when it comes to passwords.
Absolutely. Strong, unique passwords are non-negotiable in a Linux environment. Because so much relies on command line access, a compromised password can be game over. We're talking potential for complete system takeover.
So no pressure, but choose your Linux passwords wisely, folks. And the sources also talk about something called root access.
Right, so in the Linux world, the root user is basically like having ultimate power. It's the administrator account with access to everything.
And while that might sound tempting, these sources are like, whoa, hold your horses. Limiting root access is paramount.
Exactly. The principle of least privilege applies tenfold here. That's where sudo comes in, which stands for super users do.
Sudo. Sounds a bit like a secret code.
In a way, it is. It allows users to execute certain commands with elevated privileges, but only when absolutely necessary. It's like getting temporary security clearance for a specific task.
Got it. So you're not giving everyone the master key, just a temporary pass to get the job done. Now, the sources also dedicate a good chunk of time to firewalls, which makes sense, especially when we're talking about servers that are exposed to the internet.
Absolutely. A firewall acts as a barrier between your system and the outside world, filtering incoming and outgoing network traffic based on a set of rules you define. It's your first line of defense against unauthorized access and malicious activity.
They specifically mentioned two tools, reputables and UFW. What's the difference?
Well, reputables is like the seasoned veteran, incredibly powerful and customizable. You can fine-tune every aspect of your firewall rules, but it can be complex to configure, especially for beginners. Then there's UF, which stands for uncomplicated firewall.
Uncomplicated. I like the sound of that.
It's definitely more user-friendly, simpler to set up, but still very effective for basic firewall needs.
So it's about choosing the right tool for your comfort level and the specific security needs of your system.
Exactly. But regardless of which tool you choose, the key is to have a firewall in place and configured correctly. Otherwise, it's like leaving your front door wide open.
An open invitation for trouble. Got it. But firewalls aren't the only line of defense in a Linux environment. These sources also highlight the importance of intrusion detection systems, and they sound pretty intense.
They are. Systems like AID and OSSEC are like having a 24/7 security detail for your system. They constantly monitor for any suspicious activity, whether it's unauthorized file changes, login attempts from unusual locations, or any other behavior that deviates from the norm.
So it's like having a security camera system for your entire network, recording everything and alerting you if something seems off.
Exactly. And that brings us to the final key point the sources emphasize for Linux security: centralized log management.
Right, they talk about a tool called CIS Log. Is that basically like a central repository for all your system logs?
You got it. Instead of having logs scattered across different systems, CIS Log gathers them all in one place, making it significantly easier to monitor, analyze, and archive them.
Okay, so it's like having a black box for your entire system. If something does go wrong, you have a central location to investigate what happened, when it happened, and hopefully who or what was responsible.
A very apt analogy. And this centralized logging isn't just crucial for security, it's often essential for compliance purposes as well, especially for industries with strict regulatory requirements.
Right, because being able to demonstrate that you have proper logging and monitoring in place can make all the difference if you ever face an audit or need to investigate a security incident. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here. From the essential roles everyone plays in third-party security to the nuts and bolts of securing Windows, macOS, and Linux systems. We've explored firewalls, intrusion detection, encryption, the importance of strong passwords. A lot to process. But before we jump into the ever-expanding world of cloud security, I want to pause for a moment and bring this back to you, the listener. Because while we've been getting into the weeds, the technical nitty-gritty, what really matters is how it applies to your world, right? What can you actually do with this information?
Exactly. This isn't just some theoretical exercise. It's about making your digital life more secure, starting right now. Think about it. What tools and services do you use every single day?
Oh man, so many.
Right. That project management app where you keep client info. Maybe you're collaborating with freelancers remotely, sharing sensitive files.
Or even just online banking, shopping, those everyday things we don't even think twice about.
Exactly. It's about being mindful of those digital handshakes we're making all the time, asking ourselves, okay, what's the security story here? What data am I sharing and how are they protecting it? Because we're trusting these third parties with a lot.
And that brings us to, I think, the final frontier of this discussion, the cloud. Cloud security, it's a whole other ballgame, because now we're not just securing our own systems, we're entrusting a third-party provider with our data or applications, often our entire digital infrastructure.
It's a huge shift. With platforms like AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, they've become as familiar as the devices we use every day. But with that convenience comes a whole new set of considerations, because now you're relying on them for the security of the underlying infrastructure, the physical servers, the data centers, the network itself.
So they're responsible for making sure the building is secure, so to speak. But what about what's inside the building?
That's where shared responsibility comes in. You, as the cloud customer, are still responsible for securing everything you put into that secure building. Your data, applications, user access, if that all falls under your watch.
Okay, so it's like having a safety deposit box at a bank. The bank provides the vault, the security guards, the alarms, the whole 9 yards.
Exactly. They've invested heavily in securing their infrastructure.
But you're still responsible for what you put inside that box. You would just throw a bunch of cash in there without organizing it, maybe putting some important documents in a fireproof envelope, right?
Exactly. You're still responsible for protecting what's yours. And in the cloud, that means understanding what security measures the provider has in place, what they're responsible for, and where your responsibilities begin.
So it's about knowing the lay of the land, not just assuming they've got it all covered.
Right. And that's where due diligence comes in. Asking those tough questions. What security certifications do they have? What's their track record on data breaches? Do they provide transparency reports? You wouldn't sign a lease without reading the fine print, right?
Right. You want to know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
And it's the same with cloud providers. You need to understand their security posture before you entrust them with your valuable data.
Absolutely. And the good news is, most reputable cloud providers are very transparent about their security practices. They know it's a major concern for their customers.
Which is a good sign. It means they're taking it seriously.
Yeah.
Wow, we've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from the boardroom to the server room, from Windows and Mac-OS to the world of Linux and the ever-expanding cloud. But through it all, I think one key takeaway really stands out. Third-party security is not just a technology issue.
It's about people.
Processes.
And that constant awareness of the risks, the responsibilities, and the shared fate we all have in this digital age.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this. The next time you're about to hit accept on a terms of service agreement without reading it, or before you share sensitive data with a new vendor, pause. Just for a moment. Think about those digital connections you're making, the invisible threads that tie our digital lives together. Ask yourself, do I trust this third party with my data? What steps can I take to minimize my risk? Because in our interconnected world, security is a shared responsibility. Knowledge is power. And the more you know, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the complex and ever-evolving landscape of third-party security. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.